Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina, and on behalf of Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Guardians of Information, Preparing Libraries for Cyber Threats, an SNSI Security Summit, which is sponsored by Scholarly Network Security Initiative, or SNSI. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Now I'll just put a couple links in the chat where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Also, if you're interested in library technology, LibTech Insights, or LTI, is a content vertical from Choice that examines the day-to-day impact of library and education technology on academic librarians, researchers, and students. The channel provides practical guidance on technology trends and products, including AI and AI literacy, user experience, useful tools, and job profiles, all of which are written by and for librarians. You can find out more about LTI, uh, sign up for the newsletter, read the blog via the links in the chat. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to submit questions or comments for our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the Show Captions button on the bottom panel of your screen. You can also turn on automated translation for the captions by clicking the arrow button, toggling on translation, and selecting your preferred language. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. And with that, we're ready to get started. So I will hand it over to Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy Best Rule, and I work with SNSI, which is a pan publisher and librarian volunteer group that works on the cyber threats that we are experiencing. And it's important to us because of the integrity of the scientific record, as well as keeping our patrons' data private and secure. So this group, we work together, and we do have a few spots open. So if you are interested, we do have librarians join from institutions across the country, as well as IT personnel. We would be happy to have a discussion if you're interested. I am the representative from, or one of the representatives from Springer Nature. So, and I am now going to introduce our speakers today. So, yes. So with us today is Edward Carrillo, who is from, Corrado, who is from the the Naval Postgraduate School, the Dudley Knox Library. He is the acting university librarian. And with us also is Alice Stokes, who is from the University of Vermont, and she is the clinical and education librarian at the Dana Health Sciences Library. So with that, I believe I am handing it over to Edward to start us out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. So just a little bit more about me. My name's Edward Corrado, and I'm currently the acting university librarian at the Naval Postgraduate School. My kind of real job was the associate university librarian in charge of a lot of administrative functions, metadata, and the systems department also reports to me. Prior to working at the Naval Postgraduate School, I worked at the University of Alabama as a dean of library technology policy and planning, and I was the director of library technology at Binghamton University. I have written and presented on various aspects of library technology throughout my career, including being a co-author of Digital Preservation for Libraries, Archives, and Museums, the third edition of which will be published in the first part of 2026. Since my day job is working for the United States Navy, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I'm speaking today in my personal capacity and not at all part of any of my official duties at the Naval Postgraduate School. And the views I present today are my own, and I do not speak for the U.S. Navy, Department of Defense, or any other part of the U.S. government. Uh, in the brief time we have today, I'm going to cover a few different topics related to cybersecurity and libraries. First, I'm going to discuss, what cybersecurity is, and then provide a few examples of some cybersecurity threats. Then I will talk a little bit about why libraries are vulnerable, followed by a discussion of some of the steps that libraries can take to protect themselves and their patrons from cyber threats. Due to time constraints, I plan to keep this at a pretty high level. Our next presenter, Alice Stokes, will discuss some specifics and lessons learned from a cyber attack that impacted the library she works at. Right. Definitions of cybersecurity vary, and I think it sometimes can be hard to define or wrap your head around what cybersecurity is, but I think the definition you are seeing on your screen from the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency covers some of the key aspects of cybersecurity. Basically, cybersecurity comes down to making sure computer networks, servers, and other devices are secure from unauthorized access, criminal use, and other cyber threats. It involves preventing cyber attacks and other threats to data that may impact the confidentiality of that data, the integrity of that data, or the ability to access that data. There are many different types of cybersecurity threats, but there are, I would say, four broad categories I want to mention today. This is definitely not comprehensive, but just to get an idea of what we're talking about. The first threat is when malicious actors access someone's personal information for their own benefit. While these malicious actors can use this information for a variety of nefarious purposes, perhaps the most common and certainly probably most well known is accessing personal information in order to commit crimes such as identity theft. Another major threat to all organizations, including libraries, is ransomware. According to the United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Center, ransomware is a type of malware which prevents you from accessing your device and the data stored on it, usually by encrypting your files. A criminal group will then demand ransom in exchange for decryption. The computer itself may become locked, or the data may be encrypted, stolen, or deleted. The attackers may also threaten to leak that data that they steal. And one thing that should be noted from looking at some of the literature about this and some of the news reports is just because a organization pays ransom, that doesn't mean that these negative things won't still happen or that they'll get uh, access back to their data. So this is very controversial, whether or not people or organizations should pay ransoms on a ransomware attack. The next category is a denial of service attack, which is when a computer network or server is flooded by false requests in order to disrupt business operations. You may have also heard of a distributed denial of service attack. That is basically a denial of service attack from multiple machines operating together to attack one target. This can be very difficult to defend against once it starts happening, especially, sometimes this could be thousands or tens of thousands of machines attacking one target. And this is what generally ends up happening when you see major websites go down is they have a huge distributed denial of service attack. And then one of the most common threats to cybersecurity that I think sometimes might be overlooked is insider threats. According to the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike, an insider threat is when internal actors such as current or former employees that pose danger to an organization because they have direct access to the company network sensitive data and intellectual property, as well as knowledge of business practices, processes, company policies, or other information that would help carry out such an attack. And that definition sort of looks at malicious insider threats, but it's important to note that a lot of insider threats may actually be due to negligence or ignorance or just not knowing any better. For an example, an employee falling for a phishing attack or not following proper security procedures uh, is an insider threat. While, and it could be a very dangerous and very serious insider threat. It's not because an employee was acting with malicious intent. It's just maybe they didn't know any better or they were negligent in their duties. Some people may wonder why anyone would want to launch a cyber attack on a library. After all, libraries are generally seen to be a public good, and they're not, a huge corporation with very deep pockets. There are a few reasons why libraries are vulnerable. First, libraries are often seen as soft targets. They're ones that maybe can be easily attacked. And then, once you get a cyber criminal gets into one system, they can then launch other attacks against other people from that target. Also, many libraries may not have adequate funding for IT needs, including cybersecurity. They may have part-time systems administrators or library systems managers, and they might not be properly trained. And even if they are, they may not have enough time to devote to cybersecurity with all their other duties. I think this may especially be true in smaller libraries, but from my experience working in mid-size and larger libraries, I'm not sure that it's just limited to smaller libraries. And also these lack of resources and training may mean that legacy systems and other systems might not receive regular security updates as they should. Uh, Libraries also operate public access computers and networks. And while these systems can be secured and there's a lot of good best practices for how to do it, it just adds to the complication and the resources needed for a library to enable and to ensure cybersecurity. Another factor is libraries are usually seen as high trust environments. This is, of course, generally a really good thing, but nefarious actors may be able to take advantage of this trust. Libraries are trusted, so library patrons, for example, may be more apt to fall to a phishing attempt that purports to come from a library, and maybe librarians and library staff may be less suspicious as well of these types of attacks. As already mentioned, libraries may not always have sufficient resources for cybersecurity. Resources are required for good cybersecurity. And these resources include time for training. While this is true of many organizations and not just libraries, many libraries do not provide adequate cybersecurity training to their employees or to their volunteers. So, what are some of the things that libraries can do to protect themselves and their patrons from cyber attacks? One of the major things that an organization can do is to make sure that they have a cybersecurity plan. I'm not really going to go get into how to create one of them here today because of time constraints, but I think it's important to note that cybersecurity is not going to just magically happen. It's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen by accident. It needs to be actively planned for and actively managed. Libraries need to make sure that they follow best practices for cybersecurity. This includes following best practices for authentication, such as not having shared accounts, requiring strong passwords, and requiring multi-factor authentication. As mentioned previously, insider threats are a big challenge for cybersecurity, and many of these threats really are not due to malicious behavior, but either due to negligence or ignorance. Therefore, it's important to routinely provide cybersecurity training to staff and routinely remind staff of the threats that can happen. Libraries should also include cybersecurity when they are training users on library technology and library resources so that patrons can understand potential risks. This includes the fact that third parties, such as database vendors, and not just the library, may have access to some of the patrons' personal data. This is particularly true when users create accounts in vendor systems. I know I create a lot of accounts in our databases so I can get notifications. This is really useful, but now that means the vendor has some of my personal information, such as my email address and also just knowing what types of things I'm searching for. Another step that a library should take is to perform a data inventory. It's important to know what systems the library has and what data those systems collect. When reviewing data that the library collects, a question really should be asked is whether or not the library actually needs that data. If the answer is not yes, that it's very important, that data should not be collected just in case it might be used. The less personal data a library has, the less risk there is to library patrons and to the library. Also, if you do collect personal data on patrons, it's important to get rid of or deaccession that data when you no longer need that. Related to this, access to sensitive data should be restricted to only the people that need to have it, have that access. Sometimes it might be easier to let more people have access. Maybe you don't want to have workers have to go to a manager to get into certain areas of that data, and so they can edit it or look it up, or maybe the security matrix in the system is kind of difficult to maintain. But the less people that have access to data, the less risk there is. So really look at who actually also has access to data to help prevent from insider threats. Libraries need to make sure they maintain their IT systems, and library administrators or university administrators that are making budget decisions need to ensure that the financial and human resources required to this are available. Some important aspects of maintaining IT systems include ensure that there's an adequate backup and recovery strategy in place, and also to make sure that it's tested on a periodic basis. I know of a number of stories where people thought they had adequate backup and recovery strategies, but they never tested it. And when it came to test it, they found out that they did not actually have adequate recovery strategies in place. Also, make sure systems are updated regularly. In many cases of successful cyber attacks on libraries and elsewhere, the technical vulnerabilities were known and patches and updates to systems were actually available before the attack occurred, but for some reason, those patches and security updates were not installed. Luckily, many IT systems today can do this automatically, but librarians should keep up to date with release notes to make sure they understand any changes that might impact cybersecurity, and for that matter, any other functionality. Also, when evaluating library technology, cybersecurity should be included as an important factor in that decision-making process. This goes for whether it's commercial proprietary software, open source software, or maybe if you have staff that are programmers at your library, your homegrown software. Make sure that cybersecurity is a major priority when implementing any systems. Without getting into any specific details, I have seen some really nice open source systems developed by libraries, but they were not updated enough and relied on outdated technology that no longer receive security patches. While the functionality of these programs were very impressive, the cybersecurity was not so impressive. Because of this, we cannot take the risk of implementing these systems, even though they had some really great functionality that would have been really great for our library and for our library patrons. They were just a security threat. And so this is something that is, really important when choosing different systems, is looking at how vulnerable they are. And also when you're installing these systems, make sure you configure them with cybersecurity in mind. Finally, libraries and their parent organizations should consider cybersecurity insurance, looking at some of the news stories and incident reports from cybersecurity incidents at libraries and other places. It seems that places that had cyber insurance in many cases were much better off in responding to these types of threats. Insurance can cover a variety of things, including expenses related to investigation, crisis communication, and legal services. Cybersecurity attack can be really expensive, and to recover from, and so it's really important to plan for that. And cyber insurance is one good way to plan for that. Communication, especially some of the experts from the cyber insurance industry and cybersecurity industry can be a very important safety net and help with transparency, especially when systems like the library website are down. And I think that communication can really be a big help when it comes to maintaining trust in the library after a cyber incident happens. Uh, in conclusion, I think if I had to sum this up in just one sentence, it would be that the most important thing to do is to understand that cyber attacks are a real threat to libraries, and libraries must make cybersecurity a priority and act accordingly. Once the decision is made and the resources are allocated to make cybersecurity a priority, thankfully there are a lot of tools and a lot of information available to help librarians and their other employees protect their library and their patrons from cyber attacks. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Edward. So again, my name is Alice Stokes, and I'm a clinical and education librarian at the University of Vermont. And one of my main liaison groups is all of the nurses at our academic medical center. In late 2020, the University of Vermont Medical Center experienced a ransomware attack, which is one of the types of attacks that Edward just discussed. So I'm going to discuss the attack, its effects, and the recovery, and some thoughts for preparing for a cyber attack at your institution. So the Dana Health Sciences Library at the University of Vermont is the medical library for the University of Vermont Academic Medical Center, as well as the University of Vermont College of Medicine, and the College of Nursing and Health Sciences. So we also serve the health sciences information needs of the broader university campus. We're physically located between the hospital and the College of Medicine, along the corridor shown here in a springier time of year. The library is part of the University of Vermont libraries, so our library systems are on the university network. And this had some important implications during the cyber attack, some positive and some negative. If your academic institution itself is directly affected by a cyber attack, there will be some key differences in how your systems and services would be affected. But I hope that some of our experiences and lessons learned will be relevant to you. So for a little more context, here's some background about the University of Vermont Medical Center, which is the hospital that was targeted in the attack. These are the figures from the 2020 annual report. So you can see that the University of Vermont Medical Center is part of the UVM Health Network, but the cyber attack really primarily affected the medical center, which is the main hospital. And it's the hospital that we support here at the University of Vermont Dana Health Sciences Library. Next, I'd like to place this in the context of cyber attacks on healthcare organizations, specifically in 2020 and 2021. It was a particularly active time for cyber attacks, many of which used COVID-19 themes, such as COVID-related domain names to exploit the COVID crisis for criminal gain. These all occurred against the backdrop of the COVID-19 crisis, which, as we already know, placed tremendous strain on the healthcare system. In fact, according to the 2020 annual cybercrime report from the Herjavec Group, cyber attacks were expected to reach $6 trillion in costs in 2021. A 2020 retrospective report on healthcare cybersecurity from the Health and Human Services Department reported that 239 million cyber attacks focused on healthcare systems were attempted in 2020 alone. And the Health and Human Services Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center also reported the attempted attacks were up nearly 10,000% from 2019 to 2020. So this is just kind of the environment that we were in when the attack occurred at the University of Vermont Medical Center, which was indeed cited in the HHS report as one of the noteworthy attacks from 2020. A dubious honor. So what happened? We first heard that there might be a disruption to the network at the University of Vermont Medical Center on October 29th, 2020. It was first reported in the news around 11 a.m. I heard about it because I was closely watching the news at that time for our morning COVID-19 briefing from our governor. We did not receive any notification from the hospital directly because their systems were all taken offline as soon as the problem was apparent. On the morning of October 29th, that same day, the University of Vermont CIO sent a message to the entire campus warning of the potential for ransomware attacks. It's not clear if the attack on the medical center had already been detected at this moment or not, but I suspect they kind of knew something was going on but weren't ready to release any statements. When it was realized that there was a widespread problem, they shut down the internet and the EPIC electronic health record system to prevent further infiltration. The hospital attack also downed the phone system, cut off access to staff emails and medical records, and slowed the hospital's ability to provide radiation treatment and run scans. A note was discovered on a network computer. It was essentially just a text file that said, "We encrypted your data. If you want to get the key to unencrypt it, contact us." There was no specific ransom note or dollar amount, just contact information. The medical center IT department immediately contacted the FBI. No effort to contact the attacker was made and no ransom was paid. All systems were down for several weeks. They had to return to paper charts. Many appointments had to be canceled. And many hospital employees had never worked in an environment with paper charts, for instance. And the electronic health record system was completely inaccessible. So you can imagine the type of disruption this caused at the hospital. The IT team wiped the servers clean and rebuilt them and wiped and re-imaged 5,000 laptops and computers. The Vermont National Guard Computer Network Defense Team was brought in to assist with this process, providing essential technical assistance and personnel. During this period, the UVM Medical Center had to furlough and reassign more than 300 employees. One bright spot, no data was breached, so it was never determined that the attackers actually got a hold of any sensitive information. So the big question is, what happened? So it was determined that an employee had their work laptop on vacation in the fall of 2020, and they opened a personal email from their local homeowners association. It was a legitimate email from a legitimate company, and unfortunately that company had been hacked. So when the email was opened, cyber criminals deposited malware, software intended to cause harm to computer systems, onto the laptop. A few days later, when the employee returned to work and connected to the UVM Medical Center network, the attackers were able to use that malware to launch the network-wide attack. Here's a little timeline about what happened and the recovery. So the hospital systems themselves were down for about 3 weeks, but it took nearly 3 months to restore access to the library systems from the start of attack. So since we're on the university side of systems, side of the system, we weren't directly affected, but we were not able to restore contact with the hospital systems for 3 months. So the acute crisis at the hospital was resolved by November 23rd, but on December 2nd, we discovered that hospital employees still did not have direct access to the library, and it took several more weeks to get access fully restored. The special network connection between the hospital and UVM was turned off as soon as the attack was detected, which meant the loss of direct access to library resources from the hospital. And because Easy Proxy, which we use for connecting everybody, no longer had access to the hospital IP addresses that are hidden behind Zscaler, it took much longer to troubleshoot and fix, even after the main hospital systems had been restored. It required the cooperation of many different parties, and our relationship with the College of Medicine helped us the process along, but it still took 83 days until the connection was reestablished. Our usual authentication methods were disrupted unless the hospital employee also had UVM credentials. So like many academic medical centers, we have a mix of hospital patrons who have university credentials and those who only have hospital credentials. So those who also had UVM credentials, the disruption was minimal. So they were able to still access things like interlibrary loan, and which usually uses either UVM email addresses or hospital email addresses. So anybody without a UVM email address was not even able to access interlibrary loan. Most hospital employees, like nurses that I work with, do not have net IDs and had no other avenue for access. In addition, we had no way to email hospital employees for several weeks to even let them know alternative ways to access our materials. A medical center email was completely shut down, and we couldn't access people's, we couldn't even communicate with people in the key way that we usually do. So what did we do? So here are just kind of 4 key ways that we reacted. So with flexibility, for instance, we accepted requests from users' Gmail accounts or personal email accounts that we don't usually do. So normally if somebody wants to submit an interlibrary loan request, they must use their university or their hospital address. Since hospital addresses weren't totally inaccessible to the users, we provided an alternative way for people to request as long as they kind of said that they were a hospital person. We also looked for alternatives. So since people who didn't have net IDs, we also tried to remind people as soon as we could communicate with them that they could use things like individual accounts. So if they had an individual account to a database that they could still log into, for instance, with UpToDate Anywhere, they could still do that. We also reminded them that the physical library was still open and that they could come in and use our resources here because our systems themselves were not directly impacted. As soon as the hospital email was up and running again, we did a lot of outreach. So sending messages to our departments, outlining all of these alternative access routes and resources. And finally, we were just persistent. We had to work really hard to get everything fully restored and also stay visible kind of to get results and to keep on people's radars since they were all quite overwhelmed. So every library will have individual circumstances that determine how a cyber attack impacts them. In our case, there were several kind of mitigating factors and exacerbating factors. On the positive side, the biggest mitigating factor for us was that we are part of the university side of the academic health center. So therefore, in this case, our systems were unaffected. We had full access to our databases, subscriptions, servers, files, emails, etc., and the university itself was not affected by the cyber attack. The timing of the attack was also a mitigating factor in some senses because it happened at the beginning of the second wave of COVID in Vermont. If you can remember back to the fall of 2020, clinicians were so busy with urgent patient care that we observed fewer requests for regular literature searches. In other words, clinicians were just too busy with essential care to be very focused on research. And most of the COVID literature was open access, so they didn't have to come to us. Also, in relation to COVID and timing, our physical library had reopened already, so clinicians could access our print and online collections in the library, and we are adjacent to the hospital. So if they had urgent needs, we were right here and open. On the negative side, the biggest exacerbating factor was also our separate systems, because this cut both ways. We were protected from the worst effects of the attack, but it also took much longer to restore the connection between the hospital and the library because of our IT systems and services being separate. So while library resources are important to our hospital patrons, this was not top of mind for the hospital administration that was coping with the dual crises of the cyber attack and COVID. Similarly, the timing was also a little bit of an exacerbating factor. So by the time essential hospital systems had been restored, we were fully in the throes of the second wave of COVID in Vermont. We couldn't enter the hospital to visit departments or provide other direct communication due to COVID restrictions. Fewer hospital employees were entering or even passing the library. So outreach options that might have been possible in normal times were just not available to us. Further, the difficulty in communicating between the hospital, the library ID department, and the College of Medicine delayed the full restoration of access. So if we had been part of either the hospital structure or the College of Medicine structure, we might have been easier for us to get our voices heard or to know what was happening on the hospital side of things. So being in the library's silo, sometimes we just didn't know what we didn't know. Based on our experiences, I have a few library-specific recommendations. Unfortunately, I didn't find much in the library literature specific to libraries and planning for cyber attacks. Edward's article is an excellent resource. But you do want to have, as Edward mentioned, a cyber attack plan and review it regularly. If you suffer an attack, reflect and update the plan. Since the UVM Medical Center attack was not on our network and I'm not an IT specialist, I don't have specific recommendations, but on the next slide, I have some suggested resources in addition to the things that Edward suggested. You would benefit from brainstorming any alternative access options you have in advance, and if an attack happens, as soon as it happens. So some ideas that we came up with, we asked patrons for alternative contact information, such as personal emails, if they wanted to provide them. Of course, they weren't required, but to give an alternative way to contact people and keep them updated. So if there's a way to do that at your institution. We also encouraged users to set up personal accounts for databases when possible. So as I mentioned before, our patrons who had access to UpToDate Anywhere were still able to access UpToDate through their own computers. So this not only helps if you have it in advance, but they could do it physically here in the library. So if they hadn't set it up, they could come set it up here and then access UpToDate from elsewhere. Consider keeping key texts in print, even when prioritizing ebooks in your collection. I'm sure many of your libraries are prioritizing ebooks like we are, but we also keep key texts in print for emergencies like this. It could be also a power outage or some other unexpected crisis where a print book is really going to be your best option. We still had access to interlibrary loan and document delivery, so we encouraged patrons to request materials through our interlibrary loan form and allowed them to use alternate emails, as I mentioned before, including anything that we have in our journal subscription. So usually we don't do ILL or document delivery necessarily for things that we have access, but we're more flexible about our policies like that. So just consider whether any of these options would be available to your patrons. And finally, create a communication plan. This is actually one of our biggest challenges. What options would you have to communicate with your patrons if your usual methods, email, internet, were cut off? Can you make physical flyers, visit departments, use social media, other creative ideas? So really think, what would you do? I read an article about an attack on the British Library, and they used a WhatsApp group to communicate with all of their staff. So are there ways that you can communicate with people if all of your systems are shut down? How are you going to reach out to your own employees if you get attacked to let them know what's happening if email goes down? So try to think in advance about kind of worst case scenario and be creative. And as I mentioned, here are some selected resources about cyber attacks and cybersecurity planning. Some of these are a little more focused on healthcare organizations because that's my specialty. But the FBI has wonderful resources. Here's a reference to that British Library report. They did this very thorough report about their attack and lessons learned, and I think anybody would benefit from reading. Then there's also the ACRL 2025 environmental scan, which mentions some good resources. Finally, just some sources and image credits here, and then here's my email. I'd be happy to answer any questions now at the conclusion of our presentations, or you can reach me via email anytime at my email listed here. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks so much to Alice and Edward. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A, so I'll just encourage everyone, if you haven't put a question in yet, feel free to do so. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you'd like or would like to be addressed. Okay, we already have a couple questions here. So first question, this came in during your presentation, Alice, from Tara. Does the library still use Easy Proxy for authentication?
Yes, great question. Yes, we do still use Easy Proxy. I haven't heard big discussions about changing. It does create problems when you work with other institutions. So I know a lot of health sciences libraries in particular face this challenge of working between several systems, and it's not a perfect solution, but it is what we still use.
Got it. Thank you.
And it looks
Yeah,
like, yeah, there's a response in the chat too about this. So always curious to hear what other people do.
yeah. Yeah, thank you, Daryl. Daryl says, our library still uses Easy Proxy. During our own cyber incident, we moved some necessary resources to SSO as that permitted faster access as IT rebuilt our infrastructure. OCLC informed us about the access issues prior to hearing anything from our own IT department. Great, thanks, Daryl. Okay, let's see. Great, and let's see. Edward, you mentioned that libraries need to create a cybersecurity plan. Do you have any recommendations for first steps toward building or creating a cybersecurity plan? And you mentioned that it should be actively managed. Maybe how often should that be updated or looked at?
Well, I think the first steps is to really look at what type of data you're collecting, what type of systems you have. I think at least in my experience, a lot of times people don't realize how much data they're actually collecting. So I think the first step is to really look at what you're having and do that. And then once you know what you have, then you can have a plan for each of those systems on like a disaster recovery type situation. And then I think, one of the things Alice really brought up that I think is really important is to think about how you're going to communicate types of things that happen and what your alternatives communication strategies are going to be. So I think there's a lot of different things. The first, like I said, the first thing I think is really important is just know what you have and what systems you have. I know back in my systems librarians days before I was in management, we would set up systems all the time and try this software and try that software, and some of those things stuck, but I don't know that outside of us in the IT, library IT department actually knew what we had. And so if we for some reason were unavailable, no one else would know. So I think doing a kind of a data inventory is the first thing. Look at your communication strategy, look at your disaster recovery strategy, your continuation strategy. There's a lot of different resources out there to look at. I do think looking at reports like of how people went through these things. For example, when I mentioned the cyber insurance, there was a library in Michigan that really talked about how that cyber insurance really helped them recover because they were a smaller public library and they didn't have the resources themselves to troubleshoot and to actually figure out what happened. But they had cyber insurance through a Michigan municipality program, and they talked about how important that was to have. So I hopefully that answers the question, but I don't have any like specific I don't know, templates or something to recommend. I'm sure there's some out there, but I don't really have a specific one to recommend.
No, I think that's a great place to start for everyone. Thank you. Okay, a question here from Robert. Alice, since the breach, have you found that it is easier to collaborate with IT folks at the hospital when access issues arise?
It's a great question. I would say yes, and no. So yes, in the sense that I think we have stronger ties now and we are more proactive. I mean, not that we weren't active before, but we're quite intentional about making sure we know exactly who to contact. Our systems department has gotten a little stronger also since then. We have some new colleagues who are wonderful. So we have been much more consistent about communicating with them kind of about lots of issues. The downside, as you can imagine, hospital security, cybersecurity has gotten much stricter. It was already tight. Hospitals are very tight, but they've gotten very conservative. So we can sometimes run into challenges where it's just we already have to do a tech audit for any new systems, any new software at the libraries, and then also making sure that it aligns with the hospital procedures can be tricky. So I think our communication is better, but it doesn't always mean that things kind of get done faster because we have to make sure that it checks so many boxes, which of course makes sense. But as you all can imagine, sometimes it's frustrating. For instance, a lot of the clinicians work at what are called COWs or WOWs, which are computers on wheels or workstations on wheels. So they don't necessarily have their own computer station. So they can't always access some things like we have LibKey Nomad now, but they don't have a way to install it on a personal device. So things like that can be frustrating sometimes. But I think overall, we're more conscious of being in constant communication.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's see a few more questions here. There's a question here from Anthony. Any suggestions if you're in a library consortium for your library management system? Maybe I'll just open it up to either maybe Edward, if you want to start.
Yeah, I'll start with this. I guess part of this really depends on your library consortium because they can be radically different in structures. Sometimes they're more ad hoc, informal. Sometimes, like say the California State University, they're really integrated into things. So it does really depend on your consortium. But I do think making sure that your consortium knows that this is a priority and that you really need to make sure that cybersecurity is something that's taken into account into this type of things and that is funded. I know like some of the consortium I've been involved with were really bare bones staff on there, and that is not a good solution for cybersecurity. The one thing that I've been thinking a little bit more about this too, especially when looking at places with less resources, is this might be a case for cloud computing and cloud things that vendors operate if you don't really have the resources. Take a large company like Ex Libris or any of your other library automation systems that run a big cloud system. They have a very big financial interest in making sure that their systems are secure because they would be, there would be, hundreds of thousands of people impacted possibly if they had a problem. So they might be in a better position to make sure that they hire and have trained cybersecurity experts than some different libraries. I'm a big fan of open source software and doing it yourself, but sometimes if you don't have the resources, that might not be the best answer. But I think the main thing when working with your consortia partners is just make sure everyone knows that that's an important priority. The other thing I would look at there is also the configurations of your consortium. Can the other libraries in your consortium see the private information of your patrons or not? How is that configured? Look at that and make sure that there's policies and security features in place to restrict that access to the people that actually really need to have that information.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Alice, anything to add there? Great. Okay, let's see. Um, okay. Oh, question from Mary. Yes, we will be supplying a recording of the presentation. I can just answer that. We'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording. It's posted on YouTube where it's publicly available. If you don't get the email for any reason, it's also posted on the registration page. So you can either go to Choice's YouTube channel or back to the registration page, and it's available there. And you're welcome to share it, of course. Let's see. We have about 9 minutes more for questions, and I'll just launch a quick poll here as well from SNSI about how everyone's feeling after learning this information from the presentation. Okay, and let's see.
I could just respond to this comment from Daryl while you're thinking about what question to answer next. I think it's a really good point. So Daryl just in the Q&A said, people should be patient with each other, particularly in like our situation or, other academic institutions, if you're kind of a spoke in a wheel and it's not just your institution that's affected. The libraries may not be the top priority, and that certainly was the case in our situation. We knew first thing, get clinical systems back online, get communication systems back online. So it took patience, but also persistence. So understanding that we were not the top priority, but making sure that we kept abreast of what was happening and continued to communicate to make sure and to check from our end and have people on the other side check to make sure that everything got fully restored once it was the appropriate time. But absolutely. And, it was a difficult time for everybody all around. So I think people extended a lot of grace, but also we had to be really persistent to make sure that things got fully restored. Yeah.
Definitely. It's a great point. Okay, looks like there's another question here from Greg. Are there coordinated efforts to push for improved cybersecurity features in library-specific information systems? Many lack adequate audit trail functionality for forensic purposes, features for countering scraping behavior, etc. I think this one's sort of open to either of you.
I guess I'll start here. I don't really know of any real coordinated efforts. I do think this is also a place where like user groups for different systems can really make a difference and really pressure vendors to make sure that these types of features are included in their software. I know I was on a user group board for a library automation system in the past, and if we brought things up like this, the vendors generally were very receptive. But also it's important for those user group boards to be persistent in making sure that people understand that this is a priority and vendors understand this is a priority. But I don't know if there's any real coordinated efforts. I do wonder a little bit about, I think, SNSI, the sponsor of this webinar, I think is, involved with some of this type of stuff in trying to solve cyber challenges that are threatening library and other scholarly systems. So maybe they have something that they're trying to do as a coordinated effort, but I'm not really positive about that.
And I don't have a lot to add from the technical side, but I know, like I mentioned at our institution, and I'm sure many of yours, every new contract, every new software, every new database has to go through quite a rigorous tech kind of review and approval. And I think those, if vendors or systems are not able to pass those, that can kind of help move people into making sure that those features and functions are available.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think more and more universities and libraries and other organizations are really making that part of their decision-making process. And I think that will make vendors have to do that. I know, for example, working for the federal government, if we're going to get a system, especially a cloud-based system, it needs to be approved by something called FedRAMP, which does kind of a security audit. There's steps that the vendors have to take in order to be FedRAMP approved. And if a system is not FedRAMP approved, then we generally can't get it, especially if there's another option. So I know one time when we were looking at our library automation system, we basically had one choice because there was only one FedRAMP approved system. So that vendor had a leg up on everyone else because they were approved and others weren't. So I think that's kind of that whole evaluation is really important. And will put pressure on vendors to make sure that they take cybersecurity to heart.
Great. Thank you both. Okay, about 4 minutes left. Time for one more question. Oh, Alice, I think you're answering this now. This is a question from Barbara. Just curious, the employee who brought the ransomware to the medical center, did they click on a link or did it just open the email to download the malware? I thought you had to click on a link to download the malware.
Yeah, unfortunately from my understanding, and I put a link to a news article that covered it, they just opened it and that was enough. So I think it really depends. And I agree. I feel like often what you hear is don't click on any links, but my understanding from the news reporting on this is that they just had to open it, the email.
Mm.
And it was something from a trusted source. So it was from their homeowners association. So they didn't have any reason to be suspicious, but their homeowners association had been hacked. So that was why it was in there.
Yeah.
Pretty scary. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know about this particular situation, but this is a very good case for not allowing administrative rights for different employees that don't need them. I know myself, I actually don't have admin rights on my computer, even though I've been in library technology and been a mainframe computer operator and a systems administrator, because we are quite restrictive on who we give access to that. And it involves a lot of different training and stuff to get admin access. But I know a lot of employees find it very frustrating that they can't add their own software to their computer. But it is a big, cyber security measure is to not give admin access and certainly make sure even if you have admin access, you don't log into your computer with admin privileges unless you actually need to use them for something.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. And in this case, I know one of the things the hospital has done is now employees can't log into their personal email on any hospital computer anymore.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. All right. I think we're about time. We're about at time. So I will wrap things up and say thanks so much to Edward and Alice for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program. So look out for a follow-up email from Choice with the link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from today's webinar and hope to see you again soon on another session. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.